I recognize Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Armenia welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and thanks for the presentation of the national report. We congratulate Eritrea on signing a peace treaty with Ethiopia on July 2018. We acknowledge the will and affirmation of the government of Eritrea to end one of Africa's most enduring conflicts. We are concerned that Eritrea ignores the request from the Special Rapporteurs on torture, freedom of religion or belief, the right to food, freedom of opinion and expression, to carry out comprehensive studies on the human rights situations. Armenia encouraged the government of Eritrea to grant access to UN human rights mechanisms in order to help to assess the human rights situations in these areas. Armenia would like to make the following recommendations to Eritrea: to ratify the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, to ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, to undertake steps aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. Armenia wishes the delegation of Eritrea a successful UPR review. I thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. I recognize Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Australia welcomes Eritrea's delegation. We also welcome Eritrea's peace agreement with Ethiopia and hope it will be a catalyst for increased international cooperation and transparency. While Eritrea has acceded to CAT, we are concerned by reports of torture and arbitrary and indefinite detention. We urge Eritrea to fulfill its obligations under all international human rights instruments to which it is a party. Australia recommends Eritrea ratify and fully implement the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Australia is concerned by reports of forced labour and compulsory prolonged national service. We recommend Eritrea introduce legislation that prohibits the use of forced labour, enforces reasonable time limits for national service, and provides options for conscientious objection. While noting that Eritrea has not carried out an execution for some time, Australia recommends that Eritrea formally abolish the death penalty and accede to the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Australia regrets the government's lack of cooperation with UN special procedures. Australia recommends that the government of Eritrea implement the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry's 2016 report, including implementing the 1997 Constitution to allow its citizens safe and full freedom of expression. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. I recognize Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the delegation of Eritrea to the UPR and thank them for their presentation. The joint declaration of peace and friendship between Eritrea and Ethiopia has brought a new dynamic of peace, security and development in the Horn of Africa. We hope that it will also lead to an improvement of the human rights situation in Eritrea. We remain concerned, however, about reports of continued use of torture as part of repression of the civilian population. We support the government's efforts to eliminate FGM. However, we remain concerned about its continued prevalence and encourage the government to strengthen its efforts to effectively eliminate the practice. Austria offers the following recommendations: end the practice of indefinite compulsory national service and ensure compliance of the conditions of national service with the ILO Convention on the Abolition of Forced Labor. Put an end to the practice of arbitrary arrest and detention, release or bring before a court all persons detained without a charge, and comply with international standards in the treatment of detainees. Grant access to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Effectively criminalize all forms of violence against women, including marital rape, and ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bulgaria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bulgaria welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and thanks for the presentation of the national report. Bulgaria would like to highlight the positive developments in Eritrea's relations with neighboring Ethiopia, Somalia and Djibouti in 2018. We hope that these significant changes in the Horn of Africa will facilitate the course of reforms and will have favorable effect on the social, economic and human rights situation in the country. We encourage the authorities of Eritrea to take appropriate steps for effective implementation of 1997 Constitution of the country. Bulgaria knows that despite lack of funding, resources and difficult economic conditions, the government of Eritrea has worked to ensure food security, healthcare, social services and reduction of disparities between rural and urban areas. Bulgaria would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue the course of political and socio-economic reforms with a view to expedite improvement of the standard of living and well-being of all citizens. 2. Adopt a comprehensive policy and legislation criminalizing violence against women and girls, especially violence against women in the armed forces. We wish the delegation of Eritrea a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie. La parole est au Canada.
Give the floor to Canada. Thank you, President. Canada welcomes the peace agreements with Eritrea and the restoration of relations with Somalia and Djibouti. However, we are troubled by the restrictions imposed on many fundamental rights, including the right to freedom of expression and of religion. Canada recommends 1. Putting an immediate end to the practice of prolonged national service indefinitely, a system which is tantamount to forced labour. 2. Put an end to the practice of arbitrary arrest, detention for indefinite periods of time, torture and ill-treatment of prisoners. 3. Take the necessary steps to improve protection of religious and faith communities, ensure their protection from persecution by putting an end to the interference in religious practices and in releasing all prisoners who've been detained for their religious practices. 4. Authorize the new special rapporteur to travel to Eritrea. We'd also like to remind Eritrea that as a member of the Council, it is responsible for cooperating with UN.
Merci.
Thank you. I give the floor to Croatia.
Croatia welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We know the dedication of the government to the UPR process. Croatia welcomes the efforts to restore peace and stability to the region and are pleased to see improvement in Eritrea's relationships with her neighbors. We hope the new atmosphere of peace and stability will affect the practice of indefinite military service. Croatia, therefore, as previously, recommends Eritrea to recognize the right to conscientious objection to military service in law and practice, and the practice of indefinite national service, and allow substitute service for conscientious objectors. Likewise, as Eritrea begins its membership in the Human Rights Council, allow us to remind of the human rights standards expected of countries' members and the efforts that need to be invested domestically, as well as the responsibility of members to cooperate with the Council and its mechanisms. We therefore recommend Eritrea to cooperate fully with the OHCHR and extend a standing invitation to Special Procedures mandate holders, including the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea. Finally, we commend the government's efforts in the areas of education and towards promoting gender equality and abolishing discriminatory practices against women and children. We wish Eritrea a successful review session. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of Eritrea, and the Czech Republic appreciates the improvement made in Eritrea, for instance, in the implementation of the right to education or right to health, and in the prohibition of FGM and early marriages. However, we regret that in the previous UPR cycle, Eritrea accepted just one of 5 recommendations made by the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic recommends the government of Eritrea to, first, invite the Special Rapporteur against torture for the country visit, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention against Torture, and establish an independent national preventive mechanism. Second, restore the parliamentary democracy and organize periodic and genuine multi-party elections in accordance with international democratic standards and invite the international organizations to observe the elections. And finally, protect freedom of expression, lift the media censorship, release imprisoned journalists, and protect journalists and media workers from unlawful arbitrary detention. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador Tesfamakil Geraghtu, to respond to the comments and questions raised thus far. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have got several advanced questions from many countries, and some questions have been raised in this interactive section as well. So I'll try to raise some important issues in relation to those interventions in both ways. A lot has been mentioned about the prospects of peace and the prospects of peace, and what we would like to say in this relation is that Eritrea is committed to redouble its efforts to achieve viable peace and cooperation. Continuous effort is being made to build trust and atmosphere of confidence through normalization measures and a systemic preparation for advancing cooperation with implications to regional peace, security and development. In this vein, Eritrea's paradigm of development will continue along two important dimensions, namely consolidating the internal dynamics on progress and strengthening engagement and international cooperation. Through an objective reading of the situation and in anticipation of the emerging prospects, Eritrea in the last 2 years initiated a new paradigm and structure for national development. This entails organizing national development across 3 development zones inside Eritrea and efforts in the Eritrean diaspora. The overall strategy is to maximize the utilization of the comparative advantages of each development zone, ensure synergy, and promote extended mobilization, organization, and creation of national capacity. Focus is being made on 3 development pillars encompassing macroeconomic stability, comprehensive reorganization of government institutions, approach and resources, and consolidation of the political process of nation building. This will entail redoubling our efforts to achieve qualitative leap in the next few years. In the above context, objective, realistic stance and practice on expectation from all corners remains critically important. Furthermore, recognition of the context, needs and ideals of human betterment on the one hand, and the progress made in the difficult 20 years in the heavy negative impacts created as a result is a necessity. In this vein, there shouldn't be any tendency to use the recent dynamics of peace as an opportunity to make pressure by ignoring the objective reality in Eritrea, which is not constructive. The response given in these statements has taken the above context as an important basis. Some issues have been mentioned about constitution and democracy, democratic elections, and the following will be our response to that. The issues require a comprehensive understanding of the political process of nation building, and the following ongoing 3 dimensions and orientations remain the main preoccupation of the government. The National Charter is presently the political map that successfully drives the aims, strategies, policies and structure of nation building, and continues to set the principles and guidance for the state governance system and the establishment of a constitutional order. In this vein, Eritrea is enhancing the political roadmap which is being considered as a major recent development. On the other hand, the homegrown indigenous constitution process that emanated from the values and convictions of the People's Front for Democracy and Justice and the government of Eritrea is also a significant experience of post-independence Eritrea. The political trajectory contemplated in those days was not completed at the time, as the country had to grapple first and foremost with existential issues of preserving its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Nevertheless, the rewriting of the constitution was declared in 2015 and is steadily going on and is on to be seen in the overall context of the future political process described above. Pursuant to Legal Notice 14/1993, the Ministry of Justice also reviewed the national codes by establishing a law reform committee. After 11 years of work and consultation, the new civil procedure, penal and criminal procedure codes were published in May 2015. And there is an ongoing campaign to raise legal knowledge and build responsibility on the pertinent rights and obligations contained in them. In the above context, the ability of the public to participate in the government and shaping Eritrea's future is consolidated. The administrative structure and the local and regional governance dynamics through elected bodies has functioned effectively in accordance to Proclamation 86/1996. In this regard, local governance through elected local assemblies, local administrations, and community magistrates constitutes a three-tier local governance and a solid basis of the state and its viability, ensuring the responsible participation of the people throughout the nation. There were several issues that relate to the strengthening of the administration of justice. As we have tried to elucidate the pertinent issues in relation to strengthening the judiciary, it might not be necessary in this respect to repeat what has been said, and so I will skip on this issue. But another issue that relates to the overall administration of justice is the issue of the death penalty. Death penalty is stipulated in the Transitional Penal Code of Eritrea. However, it's exceptionally applied for criminal offenses that entail capital punishment and include serious offenses like armed rising and civil war, aggravated attack on political or territorial integrity of the state, intentional impairment of the defensive power of the state, high treason, espionage, genocide and crimes against humanity, Article 281, grave war crimes against civilian population, Article 282, grave desertion, Article 300, aggravated mutiny, Article 312, aggravated homicide in the first degree, Article 522, aggravated robbery committed in gangs, Article 637. Death sentence shall not be pronounced on persons who commit the offense under the age of 18 years, persons in state of limited responsibility, or pregnant women. The death sentence shall also be suspended in case of serious illness or woman prisoner with a child. In case of a woman with a child and such child must be nurtured, the sentence will be committed to rigorous imprisonment for life. Death penalty shall not be executed without the confirmation of the President of the State of Eritrea. The President is bestowed with the legal and institutional power to convert the death penalty to rigorous imprisonment. Nevertheless, the State of Eritrea is under the de facto moratorium for many years in the past. The other issue that has been repeatedly mentioned is on the issue of detained people for political reasons, for religious beliefs, and prisoners of conscience. Expressing one's political opinion or belief is not a crime in Eritrea for any citizen. The allegation on political prisoners or prisoners of conscience detained for having made a call in favor of reform and democratic election and greater respect for human rights is factually unfounded and far from the truth. The cases are rather a national security issue and related to the dangers created on the nation in a situation of war. Another issue that has been repeatedly raised is the rights to freedom of expression, opinion, conscience, and religion or belief, as well as the right to peaceful assembly and the right to freedom of association. The right to express and disseminate opinions within the law is respected, but shall only be exercised with special duties and responsibilities, as well as respect for others. It may therefore be restricted for respect of the rights and reputation of others, for the protection of national security, public order, public health, and morals. Eritrea is a secular state and religious freedom is indeed guaranteed by law. Nobody is subjected to arrest because of his or her religious belief. Eritrea has also a rich history of religious tolerance, coexistence, and harmony in a turbulent region that is often racked by acute religious polarization and strife. Freedom of religion is not only protected by law, but is also a tradition and culture respected by every citizen. Attempts made to sow discord are subject to legal action. In this respect, religious bodies have their respected hierarchies, conducted their own elections for their respective hierarchies, the Synod, the Dar el-Ifta, and other decision-making organs without any intervention from any side, including the government. Even within the confines of secularism, the government of Eritrea has obligations to ensure the centuries-old religious tolerance and harmony is not perturbed by externally induced new trends of Islamic or Christian fundamentalism that corrode the social fabrics. Religious institutions have to comply with the requirement in Proclamation 73, 1995, and subsequent regulations. The government thus introduced administrative regulations in 2002 that basically request new phases to declare their source of funding. On conscientious objection and restore citizenship of Jehovah's Witnesses and give national ID cards. Jehovah's Witnesses had long forfeited their legal status when they refused to recognize the temporal government after liberation and opposed the April 1993 referendum determining the independent status of the nation after 30 years of national liberation struggle. The group failed to comply with the rules. It further continued to sow discord among the different denominations, attempted to destabilize the social fabrics, and politicized its activities. In such violation instances of the Eritrean law, appropriate measures are taken to restrain subversive activities. Pursuant to the Eritrean national another advanced question that was raised was on independent media outlets. Public media has been strengthened to cultivate progressive thinking, transformational culture, and reliable information instrumental to a knowledge society. Furthermore, it helped to consolidate the responsible participation of every citizen. Accordingly, radio programs are available in all Eritrean languages and TV programs broadcast in several languages. Print media is also emerging as an important dimension of this development. Eritrea media facilities and programs cater for a wider public participation. On top of widely accessible public media, various other means promote access to information. The exponential growth in television satellite dishes that have sprouted throughout the country, including in most of the rural areas and peripheries, is evident. The prevailing low bandwidth and speed notwithstanding, there are no restrictions whatsoever on internet access, and internet cafes are preponderant everywhere. Press Proclamation number 90 of 1996 regulates press freedom. Article 4, sub-article 1 guarantees freedom of the press. With that spirit, there was a period that private media was encouraged and has shown proliferation until the law was abused and public safety threatened in 2001. Without going much to the details, freedom of expression should not exceed the limits of national security and public disorder. Proclamation 90, 1996 also stipulates that ownership of television and radio is reserved to the government. However, on-air and online media such as television, radio, and websites have cross-border effects. In this sense, radio and television broadcasts are disseminated without any censorship. Eritreans residing abroad run television and radio stations and websites that entertain different views, and these are disseminated freely in Eritrea. The government strives to provide information to the public by different means possible, including through frequent public seminars by high-ranking officials, broadcasting the opinions of criticism on air, etc. I will return to some of the other questions maybe in the next round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I give the floor to Estonia. Je donne la parole à l'Estonie.
I recognize Estonia.
Mr. President, Estonia welcomes the delegation of Eritrea to this UPR session. Estonia notes positively the progress achieved on the right to education and the steps taken towards promoting gender equality, including by abolishing discriminatory practices against women and girls. We remain, however, concerned about the lack of progress on independent judiciary, lack of clarity on the status of the Constitution, indefinite national service, and restrictions on freedom of expression. Thereby, we would also like to reiterate the fundamental importance that non-discriminatory access to Internet have for exercising the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information. We hope that the membership of the Human Rights Council will provide a positive impetus for Eritrea to cooperate fully with all international and regional human rights mechanisms. Estonia would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Grant access and cooperate fully with Special Rapporteur on Eritrea. 2. Establish an independent, impartial and transparent judiciary. 3. Bring the legislation on freedom of expression into compliance with the ICCPR and enable independent, diverse and pluralistic media. 4. Reform the penal code to bring it into compliance with international human rights law. Wish the delegation a successful review. I thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. I recognize France. Thank you, President. My thanks to the Eritrean delegation. Despite some success in education and health, the civil and political rights situation is particularly disturbing. The rights of Eritreans are not respected when it comes to political freedom, trade union freedom, freedom of conscience, opinion, expression, meeting, association and religion. In this backdrop, we encourage Eritrea to implement the following recommendations: to put an end to national service of indefinite length, no longer justified since the normalisation of relations with Ethiopia, put a stop to arbitrary arrest and prolonged detention without charges or trial for political reasons, to put a stop to enforced disappearance and ratify the relevant UN convention, to fully cooperate with special procedures mandate holders, notably the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Eritrea, abolish the death penalty and forthwith reduce the catalogue of offences punishable by death. We wish you every success in your review. Thank you. I thank you. I recognise Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany welcomes the delegation of Eritrea. We commend Eritrea for the rapprochement and opening of the border to Ethiopia and the enabling of free exchange of persons and goods between both countries. Germany remains concerned about the human rights situation, in particular of people in detention. Germany recommends 1. Implement the 1997 Constitution, alternatively step up the drafting of a new constitution in an inclusive way and hold free and fair elections with international monitoring without delay. 2. Establish provisions for conscientious objections to military service and bring an end to indefinite involuntary conscription for national service. 3. Extend a standing invitation to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and to all special procedures and cooperate fully with OHCHR. 4. Review domestic legislation, legal provisions concerning religious groups and strengthen national legislation concerning freedom of religion and belief and ensure its free exercise. 5. Release or bring before court all persons detained without a charge and respect international standards in the treatment of detainees and provide unlimited access to the ICRC to all detention facilities. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I recognise Ireland.
Mr. President. Ireland warmly welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland acknowledges Eritrea's efforts to advance human rights domestically since the last UPR cycle, including the recent peace agreement with Ethiopia and renewed engagement with the international community, which will be essential to improving the lives of Eritrean citizens. Ireland makes the following recommendations to the Eritrean delegation. 1. Undertake comprehensive reforms, such as repeal of Press Proclamation No. 90/1996, to allow for an independent media and a safe and enabling environment for journalists and human rights defenders, including by ensuring their protection against arbitrary arrest, harassment and intimidation. 2. In line with Human Rights Council membership responsibilities, fully cooperate with international human rights mechanisms, including by responding positively to requests for visits and information from UN Special Procedure mandate holders. We wish Eritrea every success with this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
My thanks to you. I recognise Italy.
Mr. President, Italy welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and appreciates the country's commitment to the UPR. We welcome in particular the measures to promote the right to education and the efforts to combat harmful practices. Italy recommends Eritrea to limit the duration of compulsory national service to 18 months as stipulated in the national law and respect the minimum age for compulsory military training set at 18 years. Cooperate with the new Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and allow her access to the country. Implement the UN Convention Against Torture, ratified in 2014, also by considering recognizing the competence of the Committee Against Torture. Ensure the full enjoyment of the right of freedom of religion or belief for all citizens in accordance with the Constitution and international obligations. Continue the efforts in fighting against female genital mutilation and child early and forced marriage. Italy wishes Eritrea a successful UPR. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I give the floor to Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia welcomes the delegation of Eritrea and notes measures taken by the government as highlighted in the report. Latvia regrets that the government has refused to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and has not provided access to conduct an in-country visit, as well as denied country visit requests to other special procedure mandate holders. Latvia recommends to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, including by granting access. Latvia also reiterates following recommendations from the previous cycle. 1. To improve cooperation with special procedures mandate holders of the Human Rights Council by responding positively to the pending visit requests, and eventually consider the extension of the standing invitation to all special procedures mandate holders. 2. To ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and fully align its legislation with all obligations under the Rome Statute, including incorporating the Rome Statute definition of crimes and general principles, as well as adopting provisions enabling cooperation with the court. Latvia wishes to the delegation of Eritrea success in the review. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to His Excellency Tesfamaryaam Geraghtu and to his members of delegation to respond to the comments and questions raised thus far. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. A lot of the questions that have been raised in this interactive session have been clearly stipulated in the report and in the statement that was given at the beginning of this session. But allow me to raise pertinent issues that need further clarification on national service and forced labor that has been mentioned, and the imprisonment or torture of returning Eritreans from abroad, and also the repeated comments that have been given on FDMC and its structure. And finally, I'll allude into some issues relating to UPR and overall cooperation. As far as the national service is concerned, it must be put into a certain context. In a difficult situation where the country has to grapple with pertinent issues of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, burden sharing responsibility of the whole population, including the young generation, and especially those involved in the national service, has been a necessity. It was not a choice or an option. It was a necessity for such a small population country, and on top of that, a country that has been in a long liberation struggle which entailed huge sacrifices and loss of opportunity. So the burden sharing responsibility for every citizen has been a necessity, and that's why the national service limit of 18 months was extended beyond its limited up to now. Having said this, the notions that have been mentioned about indefinite national service is out of context and unacceptable. The issue of military conscription. National service is not about military conscription. So that notion is also not acceptable. And then furthermore, the issue of forced labor. National service has not been used as forced labor. It is a criminal offense to use forced labor in Eritrea, in particular in the case of children. So all these notions, all this offensive language, which has been repeatedly said in all these statements before now, are not acceptable and should not be related conceptually and practically in relation to national service. Because national service is part of the overall system of upbringing of a new generation in Eritrea, alongside the national educational system and the summer work program of students that is intended to relate them to community and community service. Apart from that, it will be very important to take in consideration, as has been alluded in the report and in the statement earlier, that several transformations have been taking place in the national service. The first one is transforming the national service into a paradigm of education and training for the young generation so that they don't have an opportunity cost to be lost during that time. So it has been transformed into training, education and training center, and once they go out there, they get an opportunity to have a certain ground for career structure and social mobility. The second issue is, in the last 2 years, the government declared a new remuneration system that also includes substantial increase of salary of the civil service, and the latest recruits of the national service have been included as an initial attempt in this new salary system of the civil service. The third important thing is that in the last 20 years, a lot of demobilization has been taking place. In hundreds of thousands, demobilization has been taking place. Between 2003 to 2007, about 105,000, and ever since then, every year demobilization has been taking place until this year. So there is this already transformation that has been taking place for several years, and therefore we are going towards the tenets of revitalizing national service into its usual orientation or in its usual structure. So a lot of work has already been done. The second issue that needs to be mentioned is returning Eritreans from abroad who are imprisoned. This is just a mockery. Such things do not happen. One of the biggest things, one of the most important things that have been stressed for years due to the situation of illegal migration coupled with human trafficking that has been used in a politicized way to lose the young generation from Eritrea, is to see how this young generation could be returned back to their country voluntarily. So a lot have been returning voluntarily. A lot who have been integrated into the new host society wherever they migrated, visit their countries regularly. They have connection and link with their family, with their country, and with their community. So this is totally out of context. Several issues have been mentioned about the FGMC and also early marriage. A lot has been said about this. But one important thing that we would like to update you on this is there is a grassroots movement taking place in many places in Eritrea, in many sub-regions of Eritrea, with the involvement of all stakeholders and government agencies, national civic organizations, religious leaders, elders, and others as well. And this grassroots movement has been behind the declaration made in many sub-regions of the country, where several sub-regions have already declared a zero FGMC and early marriage, and some are going towards that direction as well. So it is a very aggressive way of addressing the issue by mobilizing and organizing communities starting from the grassroots level up to the national level. Several issues related to international cooperation have also been mentioned. In the first place, let me congratulate and thank many of the delegates who have come forward with concrete recommendations on the vitality of the UPR. Eritrea reaffirms its commitment on the UPR process as the most effective mechanism of engagement in international cooperation on any human rights issues and concerns. It has also developed the institutional and organizational basis and experience for implementing the UPR, which will be consolidated further in the future. This institutional and organizational basis is also used as an infrastructure for coordination of all other international commitments like the CEDAW, CRC, migration, labor, and also regional commitments that we have along the African Charter for Human and People's Rights, and etc. As far as Eritrea's membership in the Council is concerned, a framework for 2019-2021 that also considers Eritrean membership in the Human Rights Council has been drafted and will be seriously implemented. It covers the comprehensive effort of strengthening the mainstreaming of human rights in national development and engagement in international cooperation on human rights issues. In this context, some normative efforts will be made to prepare a working document on mainstreaming, strengthening the effective utilization of the UPR process as a mechanism of engagement and international cooperation, assessments on the innovative approach and practices reflected in the UPR Eritrea report as mentioned by one delegate, strengthening the role and contribution of all forms of national civic society organizations, and strengthening the emerging infrastructure of coordination for human rights commitments. Cooperation with international human rights mechanism has also been mentioned. Eritrea is committed to promote and further expand its cooperation with various international instruments. Eritrea, however, opposes country-specific mechanisms intended to pursue other political motives and agendas in the pretext of human rights that undermine engagement and international cooperation through the UPR and that negate the UN international principle of non-selectivity, non-objectivity, and non-transparency, which is counterproductive. Eritrea will work in collaboration with other members to maintain the effectiveness and credibility of the Council. Raise it now. I will maybe include them in the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I give the floor to Netherlands.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of Eritrea for the presentation of its national report. The Netherlands welcomes the improved relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia and hopes that the positive developments in the Horn of Africa and Eritrea's membership to the Human Rights Council will lead to the improvement of human rights in Eritrea. The Netherlands commends Eritrea for its progress on preventing female genital mutilation and child early and forced marriage. The Netherlands, however, does remain worried about a number of human rights issues, including the national service and the punitive measures Eritreans face upon their return to Eritrea after having left the country illegally. Therefore, the Netherlands recommends Eritrea, 1, to take the necessary steps to end indefinite national service and begin a phased demobilization for those serving for more than the statutory 18 months. And 2, the Netherlands recommends Eritrea to guarantee that Eritreans are able to return to Eritrea in safety, with dignity, and without fear of being penalized for having left Eritrea. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Norway welcomes Eritrea's participation in the UPR process. The rapprochement with Ethiopia is of great importance and gives hope for positive human rights developments. Norway recognizes some positive steps taken by Eritrea, especially concerning women's rights. However, Norway remains gravely concerned about the overall human rights situation. We remain committed to support Eritrea's realization of its human rights obligations. Norway recommends that Eritrea improve the administration of the justice system by carrying out judicial and penitentiary reforms in order to ensure compliance with international human rights law. End practice of national service beyond the statutory 18 months and begin a phased demobilization. Cooperate with the international community, including OHCHR and UN Special Procedures mandate holders, in efforts to verify, promote and protect human rights. Release or bring before a court all persons detained without charge, and develop a national action plan for the implementation of the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I recognize Slovakia.
Mr. President, Slovakia welcomes the delegation of Eritrea to this UPR session and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. We note with appreciation the adoption of the national policy on children and encourage Eritrea to develop a strategy for its implementation, as well as to allocate sufficient resources to the entities designed to coordinate the implementation of the CRC. In this regard, we recommend that Eritrea ratify the optional protocol to the CRC on a communications procedure. Furthermore, we recommend that Eritrea ensure accountability for past and persistent human rights violations and crimes, and release without delay all persons detained without trial, and investigate all allegations of torture and ill treatment in detention facilities and by the law enforcement agencies. We are also seriously concerned by the indefinite national service. Therefore, we recommend that the government limit the duration of compulsory national service to 18 months as stipulated in the law. We wish Eritrea a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I recognize Slovenia.
Mr. President, we wish to thank the delegation of Eritrea for its commitment to the UPR process. Slovenia would like to make to the government of Eritrea the following recommendations. 1. Allow all human rights defenders and civil society organizations to exercise their right to freedom of expression, opinion and association without threat or harassment. 2. Establish a child-friendly juvenile justice system in full conformity with the relevant standards, promote alternative measures to detention of children, and where detention is unavoidable, ensure that the detention of children is a measure of last resort and for the shortest possible time. Mr. President, we are concerned by the reports on the overall human rights situation in the country, in particular by the reports on the prevalence of torture, deplorable conditions in detention centers, human rights violations related to national service, and limitations and restrictions placed on human rights defenders and civil society organizations. We call on Eritrea, as a new Human Rights Council member, to uphold the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights and to cooperate with all human rights mechanisms, including HRC special procedures and treaty bodies. I thank you.
I thank you. I recognize South Africa.
President.
Parties and organisations can enjoy their rights, and fifthly, cooperate with all mechanisms of the United Nations.
Trafficking.
I thank you. I recognise Sweden.
Sweden welcomes the state of Eritrea's participation in the UPR process and acknowledges advancements of the human rights situation related to women's rights and the rights of persons with disabilities and the human rights dialogue that we are conducting. However, Sweden remains seriously concerned over a number of human rights issues. Sweden calls on urgent reforms regarding the rule of law, freedom of expression and cooperation with the wider UN human rights system, including the Human Rights Council
Council's special procedures, and would therefore like to make the following recommendations. 1. To urgently establish and implement a constitution guaranteeing universally recognized human rights for all Eritrean citizens. 2. To release or bring before a court all persons detained without a charge and respect international standards in the treatment of detainees. 3. To take concrete measures to ensure full respect for the rights to freedom of expression and opinion, as well as freedom of religion or belief, including as it pertains to the press and other media. Sweden wishes Eritrea all success in the current review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie. La parole est...
I thank you. I recognise Switzerland. Thank you, President. Switzerland welcomes the Eritrean delegation and would like to make the following 4 recommendations. 1. We recommend that Eritrea launch an inclusive and transparent process with a view to adopting and implementing a new constitution. 2. Whilst taking note of the joint activities in the area of the administration of justice, Switzerland recommends that Eritrea steps up its cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations. 3. Switzerland recommends that Eritrea, as a new member of the Human Rights Council, cooperate with all council mechanisms, notably special procedures, so that they can be invited to visit the country. And lastly, whilst recognising the government's efforts to promote access to education and health services, Switzerland recommends that efforts be stepped up to ensure full respect for the fundamental rights of women and girls. I thank you, President.
Je vous remercie. Je donne la parole au
I thank you. I recognise the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
The UK welcomes Eritrea's engagement with the UPR process and urges cooperation with the Special Rapporteur and with OHCHR. We remain concerned by the human rights situation. We urge Eritrea to reform national service, especially given political progress in the region and the reduced threat to national security. We note that the government states no citizen is imprisoned on account of beliefs and would welcome further assurances on this. We urge the government to allow the international community to verify the progress claimed in paragraph 85 of their report regarding places of detention. We recommend 1. Set out and implement a clear time-bound plan as referenced in paragraph 14 of Eritrea's UPR submission on reform of national service with updates every 6 months. 2. Ensure due process for all detainees and release those arbitrarily detained for political and religious reasons. 3. Open all places of detention to organisations with expertise in the field, such as the ICRC. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you. I recognise the United States of America.
The United States welcomes the Eritrean delegation. We recommend Eritrea, 1, release political prisoners, including journalists and members of religious groups held on account of their beliefs or affiliations, and allow greater transparency into legal proceedings for those arrested. 2, adhere to the proclamation that limits national service to 18 months, facilitate free enterprise and job creation to bring more employment opportunities outside of national service, and allow conscientious objection to military elements of national service. 3, implement constitutional provisions and international obligations that protect the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and religion or belief, and expand opportunities for citizens to participate in their government. The United States applauds Eritrea's efforts to pursue peace with its neighbors and its engagement with the international community. We highlight the importance of protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms as essential elements of peace, security, and development, and restate our interest in working together to advance these common goals. We strongly believe that strengthened human rights protections create the conditions for Eritrea's domestic development and can also bolster Eritrea's contributions to regional peace and security. We urge Eritrea to begin a dialogue with UN Special Rapporteur Daniela Kravitz on the situation of human rights in the country, as this would improve the international understanding of Eritrea's views and actions on human rights issues. Thank you.
I recognize Uruguay.
Uruguay welcomes delegation of Eritrea. We congratulate them on the measures adopted to mainstream and make effective the ban on female genital mutilation, and as noted in the national report. We urge the country to continue working for the human rights of women and girls. We note with satisfaction the recent ratification of the Convention Against Torture. Uruguay recommends on that basis implementing measures to complying with the provisions of the CAT and consider acceding to the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance, as well as accepting the competence of its committee to receive and consider communications. Uruguay therefore reiterates its recommendation to implement measures to abolish the death penalty and to consider ratifying the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Finally, Uruguay reiterates its recommendation of accepting requests for visit by the Special Rapporteur on Torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment, as well as of the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary or arbitrary execution. Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We've come to the final speaker on our list. All interventions will be posted on the extranet page of the UPR, provided that they've been downloaded in Word form on the same system used by the delegation for inscribing it on the list of speakers. And I give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Tesfamaryaam Gerahtu to respond to the comments and questions raised so far, as well as for his final comments. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to address three important issues. One is on child labor and its worst forms, which has been mentioned several times, juvenile detention, and again on returning Eritreans. As far as child labor and its worst forms is concerned, there is a proclamation on labor in Eritrea, and the provisions of the proclamation are strictly followed and implemented. An essential element that is needed as a base for the discussion on child labor is the culture of the Eritrean society clearly stipulates that the best interests of the child should be respected. And in fact, there is a proverb that says, everything good for the child. So there is that culture among the society which is greatly upheld by community practices. But more than that, yes, there are children who support or participate in the family activities, in agricultural, small activities, supporting the family, and etc., like herding sheep and goats and similar other activities. But child labor and its worst forms doesn't exist in Eritrea. And in fact, one of the greatest benefits that has been created in the last years, the last 27 years after independence, is that the free compulsory education that has been provided throughout the country, including in remote rural areas and including in nomadic and semi-nomadic areas, is a great benefit in terms of completely avoiding child labor and its worst forms in Eritrea. Furthermore, inspections and monitoring are rigorously conducted by the Ministry of Labour and Human Welfare. But on top of that, there is a tripartite alliance between the Federation of Employers of Eritrea, the National Confederation of Eritrean Workers, and the Department of Labour of the Ministry of Labour and Human Welfare, who jointly also conduct monitoring, supervision, inspection in various ways and at various times. So it's strictly regulated on the basis of the proclamation on labor. The second issue is juvenile detention. Yes, juvenile detention center in Eritrea is only in the central region due to institutional and resource capacities. In some places, yes, some juvenile criminals are held with some adults, but in as much as possible, they are put in separate dorms and conduct their activities, various types of activities also, in separation. The most important thing that needs to be taken into consideration in Eritrea is that juvenile crime in Eritrea is minimal and could be taken as very insignificant. So we are talking about very insignificant number of juvenile delinquents. But generally, much effort is made to uphold their rights. As far as returning Eritreans being incarcerated and subjected to torture and so on, that's completely false. And it's an unwarranted assertion, and anybody can check on that, because the diaspora visit their countries, even those who migrated illegally visit their country regularly. So there is no such thing happening in Eritrea, and we take it as an offensive language to put such type of recommendation on Eritrea. Thank you very much. On this note, I would like to thank all delegates for their recommendations, for their inputs. We have taken note of many of the recommendations and points that have been raised. We will study them. We'll take them back to the capital and make a comprehensive assessment on all those questions and recommendations that have been forwarded in this very interesting interactive dialogue or session that we have conducted. And we are committed to implement the recommendations that will be accepted by the government, as we did in the second session. And again, thank you for all your support and your contributions.
I thank His Excellency Ambassador Tesfamaryaam Gerahtu and his delegation for their participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, made up of the representatives of the Bahamas, Bangladesh and Rwanda. As per the procedure established in 2015, the section devoted to recommendations will be distributed on Wednesday, 30th January at 6 o'clock, adopted on Thursday, 31st January, starting from 4:30. The comprehensive report, including the summary, will be distributed by email on February 8th, February 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our meeting.